introduce you excitedly to my colleague, Hart.
Well, good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Thank you for having me. Gordon, thank you for the invitation. I appreciate that. And good to be with you. I got in the hotel about 1:30 last night. When I came out of the airport and got on the freeway, and I looked and I thought, does that say 60 miles an hour? I was so happy to see that it was not. So that was kind of exciting. But for the next 50 miles, I kept checking this. I'm like, is that really 80? Is that, I wasn't sure, right, for a while. It didn't feel natural, right? I've been traveling 80 miles an hour legally. Right? Like seeing a police car, not having to, pause. That is in some ways what we're going to be talking about is figuring out how to move and spend time in places and with approaches that don't feel natural all the time at first. And that knowing that ultimately becomes something more natural to us as we move into it. So, again, my name is Hart. I have served in multiple conferences. I've done Ohio twice now. So I've served for a conference minister for about 1,000 of our churches and about 250,000 of our members. That doesn't make me an expert in anything, but it does help me with a wide perspective of the church in the UCC. And we always have conversations with other middle judicatory, finding out what's going on in other churches as well. And, there's some real change going on, real significant change. And that's part of what we'll talk about today. So thank you for allowing me to be here. About 100 years ago, Gaudi was his name, started the work on the Sacred Familia in Barcelona. I got to see this, actually. And you can't really tell from this picture, but all of these, there's like three main sides of the church. One has to do with the birth of Jesus, one has to do with the death, and one has to do with kind of the resurrection and the glory. Gaudi said 100 years ago, there would be a time when people stop going into the churches. So we should make the message visible on the outside as well. So if you have a chance to Google it, it's amazing. I mean, all of these little nooks and crannies have carvings that are biblical and angels and all this. I mean, it's really amazing. On the inside, the way he had it set up was very inspired by nature. The pillars in the church look like trees. So he needed fewer of them, so it's a bigger expanse area kind of thing. He was constantly ridiculed for that. And one of the things, I went on the Gaudi tour, right, because he did some houses and stuff like that. I asked the tour guide, I said, how did this architect get to a place where he was able to see things so differently? I've always been fascinated by people, that can somehow break out of the normative or the usual and see things in a different way. I said, what was it that inspired him to do it? And the guy wasn't religious, I could tell by how he talked during the tour, and he didn't know that I was a pastor. So when I asked him, I said, what inspired him? He said, God and nature. And I thought that was really interesting that this guy identified in Gaudi, he was an expert in Gaudi, that God inspired him to see things differently. that's not how we often think about it. Oh, I have this thing that will work too. Local pastor told me this the other day, a couple months ago. He said, I want to build a church that is meaningful and relevant for my son, but doesn't tear away what is meaningful for my mother. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. You've heard of the sandwich generation? That's what we are in the church too. We're in the midst of this hugely important, changing time in our history where people are understanding spirituality and faith in very different ways. I mean, if I had a drum, I would beat it while I said that, because that is fundamental to our future, to understand that massive change in how people deal with spirituality and faith. If we don't get that, if we don't absorb that as a church, we're just not going to be as successful as we could be in the future. Okay. So let me just talk a little bit about our agenda today. I'll kind of rush along, but that doesn't mean you can't stop me or raise your hand or yell out something. Or I want to make it as much of a dialogue as we can. But there's kind of a lot to cover, so I'll go fast. But that doesn't signal to you I don't want to be interrupted. Okay? So just yell louder. So first, just some welcome and intros. We'll have just a little bit of time to frame this conversation as some theological framework for us. Then we're going to talk about this concept of the diffusion of innovation. That was, I did a Master of Divinity and a Master of Theology. And then I went back for a Master's of Arts and Communication and focused mostly, or a lot on this concept of diffusion of innovations. How do new ideas happen in communities? We'll talk about that. Then we'll talk a little bit about human-centered design. And the hand is, you all are an experiment, okay? I'm trying out this way to describe this process, and I kind of like to get your all's feedback on it, see if it works, okay? And then we'll have some time to work in the afternoon. We'll move into that, actually using these ideas to help us be more creative and innovative, okay? So does that make sense to this point? You've heard a little bit about me. Here's what I like to do. I know right away that this is something that sometimes makes people feel uncomfortable at the very beginning. I know we are going to be working in groups in the afternoon, and that you all have signed up for different groups. I would like to see, if you're willing, if we can move into those groups now, so that we can be in those groups while we talk about a process to use to be more and pull out more creative ideas. Is that all right? I know getting up and moving, I get all that, but what are the groups and where should they be? Let's talk about the idea of innovation, because I have found that sometimes in the church, when we use a word that has been embraced by other disciplines, including business, it makes us feel a little odd, right? So the use of innovation in the church sometimes for some people makes them feel a little bit odd. But the concept is not a business concept. They just adopted it before we did. Okay? The whole idea of innovation is to take two different ideas or concepts and bring them together in new ways in order to serve people better, help people better, do things easier. Okay? So I like this picture because, for probably all of the history of human beings, we have had some kind of sack or some kind of box or something to carry our things with us. Today, mostly we use suitcases. We've also, for a long, long time in human history, had wheels. But it wasn't really that long ago when somebody said, why don't we put wheels on a suitcase? Right? And I kind of remember when that was coming out, and I thought, that's not right. I mean, it wasn't like a biblical thing I was against it, but I just thought, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to carry my own, I don't know if it's like a macho thing or something like that. But then after a while, I roll mine along just like everybody else now, right? So it was that thing where I was a little uncomfortable with some of the changes, and then now I've learned that it's really not that big of a deal, and it's also really, really helpful, right? That's the idea of innovation. That's it. That's it. Is just simply to be able to bring together a couple of concepts that hadn't been brought together before and make something spectacular. Is Pokemon a big thing out here? Yes. So in some place, right? Yeah, we might not all be doing it, right? But Pokemon, right? It's this combination of this game that was out 10 years, or a show that was out 10 years ago, and it was a board game. And so they took this board game, this TV show, combined it with the new cell phone and smartphone thing, and the accessibility of a lot of Wi-Fi and internet all over the place. There you go. Are there any around here?
There are, and this is a Pokestop.
This is a Pokestop.
This is a Pokestop.
Well, yeah, we've probably gotten into a foreign language for some people all of a sudden, right? So they've combined all those things, and they've made this game that is hugely popular. And one of the things about this game is all around the world, they have these animated little animals that you can capture. So it'll actually show up, it'll be sitting over here on the carpet, and then you have to, with your finger, throw this little ball thing at it, and it captures it, right? So churches like this is a Pokemon stop where you can get extra things and stuff. That's maybe not everything, everybody wants to do it, but that's this demonstration of being able to take things that weren't brought together and bring them together in an amazingly powerful way. Here's kind of my three basic concepts today. One is, over here, change is happening. See, get it, the tool change thing, right? So, I'm not saying it's terribly inventive itself, but change is happening. We know this. You all have children, grandchildren, co-workers, people that are spiritual but aren't going to church. We know and see this change and feel it when we go into our churches on Sunday, when we talk with our families, when we go to work, or just talk with people in general. We know that the number of people involved in religion has declined, but the number of people that are reporting that they're having spiritual encounters of some kind has increased. I went over to Norway a couple months ago, and I'd never been there before. One of the reasons why I got interested in Norway, because I read an article, I think from the New York Times, that said, Norway is one of the most non-religious countries in the world. But there is this huge kind of popular movement in Norway around ghost hunting. And I thought, isn't that interesting, right? Yeah, this idea that people are not, religious going, but this idea and this connection of spirituality. So that has thrown us off a little bit in the church. So that's happening. I don't know if any of you know about the story of The Matrix, the movie of The Matrix, but there's a point in time where the main actor has to decide, do you want to take this pill and you'll go back to sleep and go back to your life as before? Or do you want to take this pill and you'll wake up and you'll see what is really going on. I think we're kind of in that space where it would be, for most of us, if not all of us, much more comfortable to not be as aware of what is going on in this kind of change thing. Easier for us to just kind of put it off or say it's not our responsibility or put it off for another day than it is to say this is a reality and this is what God has called us to serve and to minister in today. So I get why people don't always want to engage these subjects. The last thing is my belief, and I believe a scriptural tradition, that creativity and imagination is a way that God leads us in difficult times. I'd like to take just for a moment, have you all talk about where, and let's just stick with the New Testament, okay? Where do you see creativity and innovation in the New Testament? What in Jesus' life and ministry is not creative and innovative? What was just normal? Where in the Bible did Jesus or God say that we were not supposed to continue the tradition of Jesus in doing God things that way? Somehow we have embraced an idea that, not all of us, okay, I don't know, that Christianity, or being a church, or being a leader, or being a good whatever in the church, is sometimes the maintaining of a system. When if we look at the biblical record, it seems that our leader identifies that the good, the powerful, the loving is all about doing the creative thing to get the message across. So I don't know, when we have conversations in our churches and we hear those things like, well, we've never done it that way before, or, oh, 20 years ago we tried that and that didn't work. Or, this whole series of, well, so-and-so won't like that. Or, might get mad, or something like that. We have developed a whole system around our culture as a church that invisibly is that invisible hand that keeps guiding us in ways that I don't know are truly biblical. Right? That's where I'm talking about, this is the waking up part, where we start to go, wow, is that, and I'm not suggesting we go to, church tomorrow and be like, I don't care what you think. And, I'm not suggesting that kind of stuff at all. I'm just suggesting we become aware of that invisible hand of the church culture that may not have been what Jesus was. So it's kind of an uncomfortable little issue with that we have, right? But that's where things like the creeds and all that stuff came from. Now, I don't know if that was right or wrong or good or bad or whatever, but that's just the history of that stuff. So once that started happening, people having these creative ideas and things like that, that became a challenge to the orthodoxy and the unity of the church. So when you look at artists during that period of time, when the church and the state were kind of one and the same, art was an expression of orthodoxy. Right? If you're going to be an artist or whatever, a poet and you don't want to get in trouble, you wrote about the things that were orthodox for you to write about. So we've always seen this creativity and change as a possible threat to us. Okay? Let me just read a passage. 1 Corinthians chapter 2. You can write this down. You'd be like, then he pulled out the Bible in the UCC gathering. And Paul says this, but this is precisely what was written. God has prepared things for those who love him, that no eye has seen, or ear has heard, or that haven't crossed the mind of any human being. That's that verse.
Say again the scripture.
It is 1 Corinthians chapter 2, that's verse 9. Right? Think about this again. Don't think about any passages that follow. Just, God has prepared things for those who love him, that no eye has seen, or ear has heard, or that haven't crossed the mind of any human being. If you just stop there, it sort of feels like we're in for constant surprise by God. Right?
That certainly puts the wheels on the suitcase.
And there it does, doesn't it? Be like, where did that come from? Right? And all through Scripture, we see that kind of constant surprise. Listen to the next verse, though. God has revealed these things. The things that eyes can't see and minds. God has revealed these things to us through the Spirit. The Spirit searches everything, including the depths of God. Sir John Templeton has a quote, and I don't have it memorized yet, but he says, God speaks to our hearts, which works its way through our souls into our minds, and by creative action, we change the world.
Who said that?
Sir John Templeton. Okay. So, are you seeing some, just generally, this kind of interaction we've had with the church, and why maybe we feel this way? You know, it's not unjust or wrong for us to feel certain ways about change and creativity. Now, here's what I want to do. And our time is running, so quick. Called the adoption curve. And the theory behind this diffusion of innovation theory actually started in Iowa with corn farmers back in the 50s. They had come up with some new seed corn that was going to grow more crops, needed less water, needed less chemicals. It was just good across the board. But they could not get Iowa corn farmers to try it. And so they started watching how it kind of finally spread. And it spread by a few of the Iowa corn farmers deciding they would try the seed corn in some small plot of their farm. And then that went well, and so they went to the whole fields, and then people that knew them, the early adopters, then they did it, and then on and on. Okay? That's the concept, is that change and innovation happens within a community, not by all of them accepting it at once, but by people who have sort of a propensity to deal with change, doing it along their path, along their curve. Okay? So as we've studied this, we've learned that within any given group, you have about 3% that are going to be innovators. It's not very many, is it? You don't need a whole lot, right? The innovators, if you look there, venturesomeness. Right? Here's the good news. We don't all have to be innovators, right? You don't have to have a church full of innovators. If you did, it probably wouldn't work, we're quite honest, right? If you had a church full of innovators and you didn't have some of the others. Because these categories and the personalities and the perspectives that these people bring serve the community in healthy ways, as long as this system is allowed to work. That's the key, right? We have to be able to set up within our churches the ability for these things to work without shutting them down. And that means we don't shut them down, but that also means we have the kind of environment where these people want to come. So we have to be attentive to that. So it might mean that we don't necessarily need to create always the environment for everybody to come to church, because that just is too broad and will happen. But what do we need to do to get a couple more of these people? Does that make sense? Now, the other important thing, and if we have more time we'll come back to this, because I think this is really important, is the group that precedes the next group is the key to helping move this along. So, to the early majority, the innovators might seem irrational or not careful or things like that, right? These two groups oftentimes need interpreters to each other, right? The innovators and the laggards. But the early majority and the early adopters can have a real good ability to communicate with one another. Does that make sense? So one of the important things I think in the church is to be able to identify who these people are. These people are oftentimes easily recognized. But these people are extremely important because they're the majority, of course. Okay? Questions, thoughts about that? Does this make sense? Yeah.
You know, I think the tricky parts as a pastor is that you're kind of, you've got all of these groups in your church a lot of the time.
Yeah.
You're trying to pastor all of them. So you are often the one who's the interpreter of all groups to all the other groups.
Yes. And oftentimes I've recognized, even in my own life, that I try to tamp down some of the uniqueness, right, instead of allowing that to. I think part of the key to that is helping us realize that we have different people in our church that think differently. And they're here because we need them, right? So the late majority people can say, well, we know, right, that Shirley's one of those people that's always bringing in ideas. If you don't have innovators, you don't have a way to feed new ideas and energy into the system. So they don't have to go with everything they come up with, but just their presence and their feeding of ideas impacts the whole. So an appreciation among the groups can help us as pastors serve them in a better way too. I've a couple times gone into churches that have, a lot of people more on this side of the scale and say, let's think about the kind of spiritual community that your grandchildren would want to come to. That's all I have to say, right? Because instantly they get it, that their grandchildren might not want to do this, and they're willing to make the change for them. Does that make sense? So helping even our churches to understand, yeah, we see things differently, and not all people are in the same category all the time. There might be things about worship that people are more conservative as far as laggards and not wanting to change. And they're not the same way about youth ministry. Yeah.
How does this match up with the similar bell curve that I studied related to organizational life cycles? And as our churches are in decline, they tend to lose their creatives and their innovators, and the percentages shift to even being dominant using this language with late majority and laggards.
Yeah.
How do those relate?
I think it's fascinating. I don't know exactly. My guess would be exactly what you're talking about.
It's really the life cycle of the church.
Yeah.
If you don't have innovators, say in the bell curve takes 7 years, which is like a business curve.
Sure.
If you don't have innovators coming in about year number 5 to start the new curve, you start the downward cycle.
Yeah.
And so you need innovators to continue to stay alive.
Yeah. And the cycle might even be shorter now because there's so much change.
The challenge is when you've had churches not having any of them come in for 40 years.
Right. Right. Right.
And that's not an exaggeration.
No. Let's talk about that. One of the things we talk about in human-centered design is looking at the extremes, right? So let's look at one extreme for just a second and say, they haven't had anybody for 40 years. Where do you start with something like that? People are more open to trying things if A, they consider it an experiment and not something they have to live with, right? B, changes less than more. And C, if it fails, it's not going to ruin the whole thing. So if you think about that, the idea around introducing innovation into systems that may not be very innovative to start with is this sort of sense of creating the space. In business world, we'd say research and design or research and development. Being able to go to the church and say, or to the conference or wherever and say, can we talk about a tithe of innovation? 10%, right? Maybe that means one little thing every once in a while in worship we do differently. Not because we think the other stuff's bad, but because we're trying to find ways to touch and help people have a more meaningful encounter with God. One thing. This week, it might be, we don't say the Lord's Prayer this way, we say it this version. Or this week, it might be, this little thing. But that kind of little bit of change. And then that idea of, can we, the Germans, we have a partnership with Ohio and Westphalia, Germany, the Protestant church there. I went and talked to them about this. And their Praeses, who's like their conference minister, she spoke about this idea in the context of the 12 spies, in the Old Testament. And the way they translate that in German is the 12 scouts. And she said, we need to figure out ways to find and support our scouts that show us where we might be able to go. That's a cool idea. I really like that. That seems more accessible to me, even to some very staid, churches than others. What do you think about that idea? Introducing it
I
that way.
found that when I read the Bible, if I replace the words Jesus or God or Moses or anybody, Lord, with love, the Bible reads differently.
Yeah.
I think one of the challenges is then, I think that's exactly right on. One of the challenges is when you have innovators wanting to come into the congregation and participate and be part of the life, they're very quickly shut down and disengaged.
Yes.
I think what I've seen with the few innovators that I have coming in my church, in particular one who's an arts, craftsy, visual person, is giving them small wins.
Right.
Right? And that has allowed her to say, okay, my gifts are available in this church. And now I have people talking about, well, when are we going to do something fun again like that? You know, it's the small wins for those innovators who,
Yeah.
and it doesn't have to be huge.
Yeah. Yeah. It's that idea of saying, look, can we be more intentional about creating space for them to do their thing that I think God has called them and kind of equipped them to do for us? There are our scouts. If we start communicating that to the people that can open that up or shut that down, and we frame it that it's like, look, they're not going to take away your Sunday morning, they're not going to take away this and that and the other. Let's give them some space for God to work through them. Let's give them a room, right, that they can do their thing and invite people to walk through after worship on Sunday. You know, I mean, just that idea of a contained space. Because I think amazing ideas have amazing power. I don't think you need to have a big, huge idea like an Apple rollout thing for something to impact the world. I mean, it can be small to start with. Yeah.
I was going to say, yeah, we print the Lord's Prayer in our bulletin because if you have new people, probably most of them have not heard it before or have, or for a long time ago. And so started changing the word once a month. And it was brought up in our council, well, everybody says it the same way anyway. Why do we have to have that in there? And one of the older members, one of the patriarchs of he says, because it reminds me things can be different, so we're going to keep it. So I prefer that being, even if we say it the old way, we still should have that new way in there.
That's the power of our elders in our community. And quite frankly, I find many of our elders are ready to try things because they see that we're not quite connecting with their grandchildren and great-grandchildren the way that we should. So to be able to use their authority and the respect and be able to demand of us as a church that we move with God's Spirit. That's all I'm suggesting. I'm not suggesting we move counter or apart from God's Spirit. I'm just saying I think we should be able to roll with it. Let me briefly just kind of talk about, as I see it, five steps. And there's different ways to describe this. But I've used the hand because I was trying to think of a way, how can we help, us remember these things. So if you think about the hand, and you start with the thumb, we've oftentimes used this symbol to mean good or bad, right? Or kind of in between. We start kind of this whole process of design thinking by identifying something that we can evaluate as maybe it's something that's not working well, but maybe it doesn't have to be a total disaster for us to pick it up, right? Maybe we shouldn't wait for a disaster to happen to start to think about how we might be creative with God's Spirit and to do things, right? So this stands for identifying our topic. We have music, youth, worship, administration. So for today, we've identified our topic, right? This pointer finger stands for the process of what we call ideation. And ideation is that period of time that we spend really in a very deliberate way to look at options and ideas before we come up with things to try. We don't do this very well in the church. Most of the time in the church, imagine sitting at a table with the board, the heating system, the boiler went out, we need to get a new one, we need to get some money, what do we do? All right? Let's have what kind of dinners do you all have? Do you have dinners or?
Fish fry.
Let's have a fish fry. We did that before, kind of worked. All those in favor? Aye, and then we move on, right? That's kind of how, or somebody says, we need to do something with our youth. Somebody comes up with an idea, seems like a good idea, we go off and do it. This stage, this ideation stage says, pause and start thinking and looking at more ideas, more data before you decide. IDEO, which is a company out in California I got to work with for a while when I was out there, or with one of the people that works there, they were asked by a hospital to help them redesign their emergency room. So IDEO decided during this part of their development to go to a NASCAR pit crew and watch and follow them for a while first. Why would they do that?
How to be efficient.
Yep.
Efficiency.
Efficiency, right? Because they're a model. They're a dynamic equivalent in another scenario. If we start thinking about whatever the issue is for us around administration, it might be a good idea to find where they're doing that really well, right? And learning from them and learning things from them. What does Starbucks have to teach us, right? That's the whole idea. That's this finger. Looking for ideas. Pausing to call up an expert at the college and ask them about something, which will save you weeks of turmoil trying to figure it out. That's that finger. Then you get to this finger, which is troublesome in some ways, but I've heard this finger described as the tall man before, right? He sticks out. After we gather all this data, what themes start coming out to us? What are the golden threads? From that, then, are there experiments or prototypes that we can try, right? The engagement ring. We're not going to marry it yet. We're not going to marry the idea yet. We're going to try it in some way to see if it works. This, I also think, is really important to the church because we have a history in the church of spending a lot of time and energy creating something, preparing for something, pouring all of our energy into it, and not really knowing if it's going to work or not. And if it doesn't work, then that hurts our future endeavors because people are like, well, we tried that before, or, you know. So the idea of just trying something small. So if it's music, right, rather than, let's set up an 8-week organ recital thing. Obviously, I haven't set one up because I don't even know what to call it. We'll do it one time for 8 weeks straight. Well, maybe, but maybe one of the things we can do is have a half an hour, middle of the week, or sometime during the lunchtime when people can bring their food and sit in the pews and listen to a half an hour organ recital. Try it once. See what happens, see what we learn. I'm working with the Innovation Lab project. I'll send you all some more materials as we roll that out. But one of the things we're working on now, because we'll be right by Ohio State University, is working with cat welfare to have what we're calling a kitten break for students, where we'll have like a box, big box, with kittens in it that students can come by and just go in and sit and pet and play with the kittens. That's during the month that we're studying joy. And the idea is, can a few moments of joy impact the rest of your day and those around you? So we'll do that, right? One time, a couple hours. We'll take what we learn, we'll share it with all the churches. You all might be inspired to do something like that. So that's that trying something out. And then the final one is, to finally make the whole thing happen, to finally decide on what we're going to do. So you all have, I passed out some of these cards, some of these Post-it notes. When you go to your groups after this, and I'll be around to talk with you all, I would like you to think about this hand approach, right? And within your topic, pick one or two smaller topics that you'd like to run this kind of human-centered design approach about, right? So if it's music, what is it about finding musicians, right? Or you know, whatever it is, subtopic within that. You know, something subtopic within that. Find a couple of those that you will work on. And then spend some time writing down just ideas that come to you about that topic. Pick one of them to focus on. One idea per Post-it note. Okay? Does that make sense? So after lunch, go in your groups, pick a couple topics you might talk about, settle on one of them, and then take a few minutes to start writing down just anything you think of, any idea, experience, question you might have that comes to your mind. Again, we're counting on our mind and our creativity being able to be a vehicle for God's leading. Okay? Does that sound good? And then I'll come around and... Okay. And then I'll show you in each of the groups, we have just produced a video for the Innovation Lab from the SALT project. I don't know if you all heard about them before. They're an Emmy-winning group, and we just finished our thing for the Innovation Lab. And Liz, their director, actually said she thought this was their best short film that they've ever made, which I thought was amazing for, and I'll come around and show that. Via Innovation Lab. Via being the path by way, I think our path is through innovation.